So, I have a new film called Dungeon of Deceit that's about to screen in film festivals, and even though the film isn't publicly available yet, I've gotten a lot of comments about how striking the visuals in the film are, so I thought it might be interesting for me to briefly talk about how we put the visuals together. There are basically three elements of the look and feel of the film that I'll talk about here. One, the practical part, that is the real-life sets and props that we used. Two, the CGI, so the computer-generated effects you see on the screen. And three, the video game elements. In other words, because there's a late 80s style computer game that's heavily featured in the film, how we put together the look and feel of that game. Starting with the sets, we shot the film on three sets. One was my bedroom, which always seems to end up getting featured in my films one way or another. The second was a dungeon set in downtown LA. And the third was a school set that was also in downtown LA. I mentioned my bedroom first because our production design wizard Pete Hickok dressed the room so it was absolutely chock full of 80s paraphernalia. There were posters, video game boxes, because video games used to come on discs that were packaged in boxes, Transformers and other toys, fantasy novels, and a lot more. It looked incredible. It could easily have worked as a set in Stranger Things. The second set, as I said, was the dungeon set. It's funny, I was looking for a set that looked like a fantasy dungeon, and I called a couple locations that turned out to be different types of dungeons. So you have to be very specific when you're looking for dungeon sets in LA about what you want. Anyway, we did find a great fantasy dungeon set, which was On-Site Studios in LA. On-Site has a couple of dungeon environments. One is the hall we see our hero walking down in the opening. The other is a throne room where our hero meets his nemesis Zareth. They have a bunch of other environments like a Star Wars-style cantina and Starship Bridge, so definitely check them out if you're looking for that sort of thing. The third set we used was a school hallway that was also in downtown LA. In addition to a hallway with some lockers, they also had a classroom and principal's office where we could keep our young cast members and their parents. Finally, in addition to shooting on a few different sets, we did some green screen work. We reshot a moment in the final scene where our hero confronts Zareth in the dungeon. Also, I made my voice acting debut in this movie as Zareth, and I actually didn't just record my voice, I also added my facial expressions. So we shot me reading the Zareth lines against a green screen, and by using mesh tracking software, we mapped my facial expressions onto the model that our visual effects artist, Rick Cortez, created for Zareth. It looks pretty incredible if I do say so myself. Anyway, next we used a fair bit of visual effects in this movie, which as I said were done by the fabulous Some Guy in Anaheim, aka Rick Cortez. I talked about how we animated the Zareth model by mapping my facial expressions onto the model, but we also did some more conventional visual effects. For instance, by showing the force field that our hero, who can cast spells in the video game, creates around himself, and the fire trap that he steps into that would have melted his flesh without his spell's protection, to quote from the movie. Next, let's talk about the video game that we see in the film. Back in the 1980s, there used to be a type of game called a text adventure, where the player would type commands at a cursor like open door or fight the orc, and the player's character would do those things in the game. Eventually, graphics were added to text adventure games, which were primitive by today's standards, but they helped the player visualize the environment their character was supposed to be in. This is the type of game that appears in Dungeon of Deceit. I put this together by using software called Quest, which is used to make text adventure games. I didn't actually make a full playable game because that would have been overkill, but I did enough work so that Lander, the actor playing the main character, could type a few commands at the cursor and the game would respond to him. In other words, we actually had Lander playing the game. He was sitting at the computer and typing actual commands into the keyboard, and the game was responding to him. All this happens on film. And I had some amazing art done for the graphics panels, which I think you'll agree are pretty evocative. So that's how we put the visuals together for Dungeon of Deceit, and I hope you get a chance to see it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you think.